The gavel had not even touched the wood yet. Colonel Frank Dellman stood in the middle of the courtroom, pointing his finger at a woman in a plain gray suit, his voice shaking the walls. "You have no idea who you're talking to," he shouted. "I built this base. I own this town." The woman did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She simply looked up at him and said one sentence that made the entire room go silent. "Colonel Dellman, please rise for the judge," because the woman in the gray suit was the judge. Before we go back to where this story really begins, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city or country in the comments. If stories about ordinary people standing up to abuse of power move you, hit like right now, because this one is going to stay with you. And trust me, stay until the end, because the final scene is the moment that changes everything. Her name was Margaret Chen, 51 years old, quiet, unassuming, the kind of woman who let people cut in front of her at the grocery store without saying a word. Nobody in that courthouse parking lot that morning knew that Margaret had spent 11 years as a public defender in the poorest county in the state before she was appointed to the bench. Nobody knew she had grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment above her father's shoe repair shop, watching him get talked down to by men in suits who assumed that because he had an accent, he had no rights. Nobody knew that watching her father swallow his pride over and over for 30 years was the reason Margaret became a lawyer in the first place. And nobody in that parking lot knew that today she wasn't there as a spectator. She was there to preside over a case that had nothing and everything to do with her past. Margaret pulled into her regular parking spot behind the county courthouse a little after 7 that morning, same as she did every day. She liked getting in early. She liked the quiet hallways before the building filled with lawyers and families and nervous defendants clutching folders of paperwork. She thought about her father a lot in that hallway. He passed 6 years ago, but she still carried his cracked leather wallet in her bag, just to remember where she came from. Today's docket had one case that stood out to her the moment she read the file the night before, a traffic stop that had escalated into an arrest. The defendant was a decorated Army veteran named Elijah Postel, a black man in his 30s who ran a small auto shop on the edge of town. According to the report, he had been pulled over for suspicion near the base housing area, and the stop had ended with him in handcuffs on the pavement. The arresting officer's name was on the second page, Colonel Frank Dellman, head of base security, a man well known in town for his connections, his temper, and his belief that his rank meant respect was owed, not earned. Margaret had heard his name before. Complaints had crossed her desk quietly over the years. Nothing that had ever stuck. Nothing that had ever gone to trial. Until now. By 8:45, the courtroom was filling in. Elijah sat at the defense table in a pressed shirt, his lawyer beside him, his mother in the second row, twisting a tissue in her hands. Colonel Dellman arrived 20 minutes late, trailed by 2 junior officers, like an entourage. He didn't apologize for the delay. He walked in like he owned the room, dropped into his seat, and immediately began speaking loudly to the bailiff about how this whole thing was a waste of taxpayer money. The bailiff, a young man named Marcus, asked him politely to lower his voice. Dellman laughed. "Son, I've briefed generals. I'll talk how I want." It was a small moment, but it was the first crack in the wall. When the case was called, Dellman took the stand first as the arresting officer. He described the stop in clipped, confident sentences. Erratic driving, matched a suspect description, non-compliance. Elijah's lawyer stood calmly. "Colonel, the dash cam shows Mr. Postel's hands on the wheel the entire time. Can you explain the non-compliance you documented?" Dellman's jaw tightened. "I don't need a civilian lawyer questioning 18 years of service." A woman in the gallery gasped. Someone in the back row lifted a phone and began quietly recording. "Just answer the question, Colonel," the lawyer said. Dellman leaned into the microphone. The man matched the description. Black male, dark jacket, driving near base housing at night. That's the description. That's non-compliance. Elijah's mother put a hand over her mouth. Margaret, watching from the bench, kept her expression still, but inside, something old and familiar rose in her chest. She thought of her father, hands raised, voice calm, being talked to like he wasn't a person. She did not react, not yet. Then Dellman made a mistake. He turned, mid-testimony, and addressed Margaret directly, not as Your Honor, but with a smirk. Look, I get it. You people downtown love giving guys like this the benefit of the doubt, but some of us have actual responsibilities. I run security for 4,000 personnel. I don't have time to worry about hurting anyone's feelings. The courtroom went dead silent. Margaret set down her pen. Colonel Dellman, she said evenly. Do you know who I am? He scoffed. You're the judge. I know exactly who you are. No, she said, you don't. She reached for a folder beside her and opened it, not for the case, but for herself. 15 years ago, before I was on this bench, I represented a young airman named David Okafor, pulled over near the same base housing gate for the same reason you just gave. Matched a description. He spent 4 days in a holding cell before anyone even reviewed the tape. I remember his file because I remember his face when we finally got him out. I remember thinking that day, that someday, I would be in a position to make sure that never happened to anyone else without consequence. She paused. That day is today. Instead of stopping, Dellman doubled down. With respect, Judge, I don't take lectures on policing from someone who's never worn the uniform. Margaret's expression didn't change, but something in the room did. Even his own junior officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Colonel, she said, you are currently under oath, in my courtroom, telling me that a man's jacket color and skin tone constituted probable cause. Do you understand what you just admitted, on the record, in front of a recording? Dellman opened his mouth to argue, and that's when the bailiff stepped forward and quietly told him the gallery's recording had already been flagged by the court reporter as evidence. His face went pale. Elijah never raised his voice through any of it, not once. When asked by his lawyer to describe how he felt lying face down on the pavement outside his own neighborhood, he answered simply, I served 11 years overseas, so families like mine could feel safe coming home. I just wanted to feel safe coming home, too. The gallery was quiet. Even Dellman's own officers looked down at their hands. Elijah never called anyone a name, never raised his fist, never gave Dellman the reaction he seemed to be hoping for. He simply told the truth, calmly, and let the truth do the work. During the 15-minute recess, Margaret asked her clerk to place one call to the base's Inspector General's office, requesting the full incident file and body camera footage be pulled immediately, under judicial order, before anything could be quietly filed away. 40 minutes later, 2 investigators from the IG's office walked into the courtroom. They had reviewed the footage. It showed Dellman, off-camera audio, telling a junior officer, before the stop, don't worry about the plate number, just stop him. By the time the afternoon session resumed, everything had changed. The investigators confirmed the stop had been made without valid cause. Dellman was suspended from duty pending a full misconduct investigation. The footage, along with 3 prior sealed complaints Margaret had quietly requested be reopened, was referred to the Judge Advocate General's office. The charges against Elijah were dismissed entirely. Dellman did not get to walk out of that courtroom the way he walked in. He left through a side door, alone, while his own officers filed paperwork against him in the hallway. Months later, the base announced new oversight policies for traffic stops near housing areas, policies that would carry Elijah's name in the internal training materials, quietly, as the reason they existed. Outside the courthouse, Elijah's mother hugged him so tightly he laughed for the first time all day. Margaret watched from her office window above the parking lot, holding her father's old wallet in her hand. She thought about the shoe repair shop, about the men in suits, about every time her father had swallowed words he deserved to say out loud. She thought about David Okafor, the airman from 15 years ago, and wondered if he ever found out what his case had built. She hoped, someday, he would. Because justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet woman in a gray suit who remembers exactly where she came from and refuses to let anyone else be made small the way her father once was. Has something like this ever happened to you or someone you love? Being judged before you even opened your mouth? Tell us about it in the comments, and let us know where you're watching from tonight. If this story moved you, hit like, subscribe for more, and stay close, because the next story might be even harder to believe.